I made a video about 4 weeks ago where I talked about how I'm switching from Postgres to a real-time database called Convex, and I got a lot of questions asking about a service called Supabase. So I spent some time basically comparing Supabase against Convex, and I want to give you the pros and cons and my opinions on why I decided to choose Convex as my de facto standard when I build out web applications. Now, I will say that Convex has sponsored videos in the past, but this video in particular, I just want to share with you my opinions on why I like using Convex over Supabase. But again, they're just opinions, so take them as you will. So I have a Supabase project set up called Supabase Meme Ranker. I also have a project in Convex set up called Convex Meme Ranker. So to compare both of these solutions, I created this Meme Ranker application where basically you can have users log in with authentication, and someone can go through and select a meme that they want to upload. And if I click upload here, notice that it updates on both pages. So I do have this hooked into real-time updates so that when a user were to, for example, vote on one of these, it automatically updates on every other user's page. And then we have the Convex solution over here. It's the same idea. You can go through here, you can select the file, click upload, it shows up on both. And now I can vote on these and they will update on every single application. So I do have a non-exhaustive list of things I wanted to kind of talk about and compare against both solutions. So be sure to stick around if you're interested in hearing about all this. So first of all, let's start with setup. Both of these services are very easy to set up. Supabase has a template for setting up with Next.js, and it has all the auth baked into it. You just go through their docs. They have a use Supabase with Next.js, and you can just basically create Next.js with a Supabase template. You'll get TypeScript, you go Tailwind, you get the cookie-based auth set up for you, so you'll have like users the ability to log in and stuff like that. Really easy to get going. It's Next 14. Same thing with Convex. Convex has templates set up already where you can come through here and you can actually pick and choose what technologies you want to include in your application. For example, if I want Stripe, you can get a nice example of how you can set up Stripe using Convex. If you wanted to get maybe some AI stuff, you can select Pinecone or just AI, and you have a nice collection of templates you can kind of hit the ground running with. In our case, we want Next.js. They have a couple here. And in terms of running after the setup, both of these can basically hook into a live environment. So in Supabase, you basically point to your Supabase project over here using some URLs as environment variables. And same thing with Convex. You just set up some environment variables and you can hook into the live Convex environment and don't have to really run anything locally if that's something that you don't want to do. So in general, both have great setups. They both have a bunch of documentation you can follow to understand how they get this going. I don't think there's one that's better than the other. They just have a little bit different paradigms and learning curves, which takes us to the next point, which is the paradigm. Now, when we're talking about Supabase, you can use Supabase as a Postgres host. That's not what I'm comparing in this video. I'm using Supabase as I think Supabase intends it to be used, where you have a client that connects directly to your database and you can do queries directly from your database and pull it in so that you don't have to write a bunch of backend endpoints. And also using something called row-level security for authentication, which I'll dive into in a little bit, right? So the paradigm of Supabase is that in your front-end code, you actually just use the Supabase SDK and you can query directly from Supabase to get things from different tables. You can do normal selects, you can do joins, ordered by, etc. And you don't have to write back in endpoints to do all this, right? The idea is that you'll save time by just connecting to your database and grabbing what you want and showing it. Also, there is real-time capabilities in Supabase where you can actually select and subscribe to changes on different tables, and you can do things in your UI based on those changes. So that's the paradigm we're going with Supabase. Now, another important paradigm of Supabase is that basically it's a thin wrapper around Postgres. So it's everything that you can do in Postgres. Supabase just gives you a nice intuitive UI, gives you a couple of command line tools that make it a little bit easier to work with. And then it gives you the real-time capabilities, which are basically just abstracting Postgres' real-time capabilities. And then also it's giving you this ability to query Postgres directly from the front end. And then there's also something called row-level security, where if your front end is connecting directly to the database, then you need to basically tell Supabase when a user can and cannot access certain rows. Right? So you basically end up writing a bunch of custom SQL to protect your rows and kind of add authorization inside of your queries. So in terms of Convex, the paradigm is a little bit different from Supabase. You don't connect directly to your database. You actually still write backend functions. And these functions, called mutations and queries, run basically on the database itself. So they're very fast to run. So in Convex, if you need to get some data from your database, you can basically just write a query like this in TypeScript, and then you can fetch data from the Convex database using this query builder type of thing. And that's what you're going to be using to show it in your page. So if you look at the code over here, you'll see that I'm using something called useQuery. I'm pointing to the location of that getMemes function. And then this is kind of very similar to TRPC or TanStack query, where the interface is super easy to use. You just basically run the query. Behind the scenes, that knows to call this Convex getMemes query function. And all this code that you write is basically deployed as you save your Convex file. So if I go over here to Convex and I were to change or add another query, just go ahead and save the file. Convex will kick off. It'll recompile and rebuild your TypeScript. Send it over to the Convex service, and now you have your latest changes basically applied so that when you go to your UI and start using it, it's going to update and use your new changes. In terms of Supabase and Convex, I like the flexibility of everything has to be a function that I write myself, which is kind of why I lean towards Convex instead of having that Supabase approach where you have to have your front end connect directly to tables. I like separations of concerns. I like being able to write a layer of abstraction so that all of my client code doesn't know that I have a table called memes, or that my client code doesn't know I have a table called reactions. That should be abstracted away from the client and also abstracted away from a lot of your business logic in the back end. And I don't think Supabase hits that very well. It kind of just says, you know what, just connect directly to the database. And I'm not a fan of that. Those are the paradigms. I could probably ramble for a while about all those things, but I think I might just need to keep going because I got a lot of topics I want to cover. So in terms of the schema, so both of these solutions have a database, right? So Supabase uses Postgres under the hood. So in terms of the schema of Supabase, one thing I think is actually pretty cool, especially if you're not really used to databases and tables and schemas, is that you can create a new table or modify an existing table using this UI, right? So I can come through here in this reactions table, and I can start adding new rows. I can add a primary key or composite key. Right here, we have a composite key of meme ID and user ID. I can change the data types. And this is all built into a nice intuitive UI. And I can click save. And then later on, when I decide I need to get this change pushed to my production environment, you basically run a CLI command, which is going to compare your local database. Right now, I have Supabase running locally, but you can kind of do all these changes with a nice visual UI, and then you run a CLI command to create your migration scripts that you'll apply to your production database. Now, a lot of people just use an ORM like Prisma or Drizzle ORM, where this stuff, do you really need an intuitive UI to do this? I don't think so. I mean, like, we're coders. We should be able to deal with code. Sometimes it is nice just to have a nice looking UI. But as you can tell, you have like all of the Postgres things like triggers and functions. You have UIs for all these, which could be a nice factor for a lot of people who don't want to just look at code all day. Maybe they want a nice way to create these things. But at the end of the day, I mean, like, you're still going to have to know about the underlying database like Postgres. So although you can come in here, you can create your tables and create your schema for them and set up foreign keys and stuff, you're going to have to dive down into Postgres at some point, and that's not really abstracted away too much from you, which could be a plus or it could be a minus. In terms of Convex, the way Convex works is when you first start a project, you don't have to define a schema at all. You can kind of treat it like Mongo or some type of NoSQL storage where you just throw data into it, and then later you can query that data back. Now, at some point, you do want to take this data that I talked about and you want to create an actual schema so that you have a lot of type safety in your code base. So if I click Show Schema, notice that it gives you some generated code that describes your data and what values that data type needs to be, right? So in this example, we have a memes table, we have a reactions table, and those have some different fields on them. And in terms of defining like your indexes, it's a little bit different in Convex. You actually have to manually put index here and supply that so that you can do performant queries in the future. But for me, I personally like writing code that defines my schema. In Supabase, I mean, it's cool that you have these UIs that you can do that stuff, but if you're going to have to drop down to the code at some point anyway, like, just get good at writing the code. That's my perspective, and I really like how Convex allows you to kind of upgrade from this random NoSQL storage to an actual strictly typed data store, right? So now that I have the schema set up, and if I go over my Convex project, you can see that same schema here. This is going to just basically do the checking inside your TypeScript when you try to store values or change values. In Convex, you have this v function that you can use to basically define the data types of your of your fields. And then later on throughout your entire code base, as I'm, reading or writing from this, for example, if I were to go and try to create a reaction, this is all going to be type safe. Overall, I mean, I think the schemas are pretty much the same. Like, it's just still you have a way of defining a table, defining the columns on that table, and the type of data that you're going to be storing in those columns. So there's nothing too much there that's a little bit different. Let's move on to the next topic, which is the ORM that you'll be using for both. Now, for Supabase, you're not really using an ORM. I mean, this is just like a SQL Builder helper, where basically you import the Supabase/Supabase.js library, right? And once you have that library and you have some environment variables set up, you can start selecting from various tables, right? So if I do a from here, I can go ahead and get data from my memes or my reactions table. And then you can kind of use the TypeScript safety to do different things. Like if I wanted to select different fields. Now, unfortunately, I don't think the type safety is good enough to actually let you know what fields are going to be in that table. All you know is that there's a table called reactions, but then you don't know what fields there are. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong if I say anything incorrect in this video. This is kind of how you do the queries. You use this Supabase thing, and you kind of do queries from your tables directly. Also on here, there is a Supabase.channel, which is where I'm doing the live data subscriptions, right? So when certain things change on my Supabase database, I can go ahead and just run some code. We won't dive into that just yet because that's at a later point. Now for Convex, when you want to get data from your front end, again, it's just this function, this use query function, and then you provide it a reference to what function you want. So if I go ahead and type API and do a dot, notice that I get IntelliSense that tells me what Convex queries and mutations I can invoke. I can do .memes and get all the functions that are on that memes namespace, and then we can go ahead and just say get memes here. And notice when we hover over memes, we do get all of the type safety out of the box. Now, one thing I'll point out that I think Convex just is much more superior is the type safety and the type generation. So off the bat, whenever you go into one of these files and you start changing stuff, it's going to recompile and rebuild all your types for you, and you could start calling those directly from your front end, right? So for example, if I go to here, if I create a new memes endpoint, I'll just call it do stuff, and then we're just going to have it return an array that's empty. Okay, let's just go ahead and do this. The moment I save this file, behind the scenes is going to run esbuild over your code, and then that is going to generate your types, which I can go over here and I can just say const other is equal to use query. I can say API, I can say memes, and then do stuff will pop up automatically for me, right? So that's a very fast feedback loop in terms of how do you interact with the endpoints that you're building. With Supabase, it's not as intuitive. You basically have to go through and you have to change your tables. So I have to go through here, I have to edit the tables, I have to add fields, remove fields, whatever. And then I have to go back to my code base, and then I have to actually run a script to run Supabase gen types TypeScript. I have to point it to my locally running Postgres database URL, and then I have to output that to a types file. Not the best developer experience. I'm just not a fan of this, and Convex just blows this out of the water completely. If there's a way to hook up some type of live reload where the moment I change my table, it automatically generates the types for me, maybe that would be a little bit better. But in terms of like the developer experience and moving fast, like Convex just has this stuff locked down pretty well. Now, in terms of ORM, I know I'm still on the ORM topic, but there's two different ways you can build out your tables in Convex. There's a newer approach using something called Convex ints, which gives you a nice way to basically build a map and traverse that map of data. So for example, I have memes, and that meme table links to a reactions table, right? So there's an edge between my memes and my reactions, and I can have multiple reactions on every meme. And so using this ORM type of style of defining your tables allows you to basically grab that data like this. I can basically say, hey, give me the table memes, order it descending, take 5. And then once I've gotten those 5 memes back, I can just go ahead and map over them and get all of the related documents, for example, the reactions that are attached to the memes that we just got. Now, it's a little bit different in Supabase where you select from your reactions connection, and then you specify what fields that you want. Okay, so you might look at this and say this is a lot less code, but again, there's no type safety here. I don't know if I'm doing any of this correct. I can just delete this and do a wrong row, and you won't really even know about it. Like you did get some errors down here of when you did the wrong table, but overall, like I would expect the code to error out here, knowing if I connected to the right table or not. That's kind of the difference between the ORMs when it comes to Supabase and Convex. And again, I just personally like Convex's approach. I just think it's a faster feedback loop and it works really well. So let's go back and figure out what else we can talk about. All right, so functions. Both Supabase and Convex provide functions that you can call from your front end. If you wanted to, for example, create a webhook API, you can do that with Supabase. The way you do it is you create Supabase edge functions, which unfortunately use Deno for some reason. I don't know why they picked Deno. This is like the one thing that was a real turnoff when I saw this. It's like, I don't want to have to learn yet another thing, Deno, which I don't know if people even use Deno, honestly. I would rather just be able to write my normal JavaScript, run it in Node, and have that work. So I tried getting this set up locally, and it just wasn't giving me the type safety that I should have gotten with Deno. So I have to go and install Deno, and then I have to go and configure VS Code to work with Deno. And then I have to learn a new approach to basically accepting requests using Deno. But as far as running it locally, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You just write your Deno functions inside of a functions directory, and then you write Supabase functions serve to have all those run locally for you. And you can actually call them. You get like an endpoint that you can call so that if you have Stripe or some type of other webhook, you can tell Stripe to contact your function like this. This is the URL that you'll get with your Supabase functions here. And anyone can call that and pass in data, and you can start doing stuff with it. So other than it being Deno, you have the ability to write functions if you really need to dive into that traditional paradigm of I need an API endpoint or I need a function I can evoke from my front end to do some stuff. In terms of Convex, everything is a function, right? So the way that you deal with Convex is you write all of these queries, these mutations, and these actions. And these are all defined inside of your TypeScript files inside of this Convex directory, right? So anytime you need a new backend function that does something, you can just go ahead and write one like I showed you earlier. Now, Convex also has the ability to define HTTP actions. So again, if you have a Stripe webhook you need to create, for example, if you want to actually create a traditional REST API or REST endpoint, you can just go ahead and create this http.ts file and copy this in. And then you can define endpoints like this. You can define the URL, you can define if it's a post or a GET. And I've done this a couple times, for example, for Stripe webhooks or for Clerk webhooks. You typically have to make these endpoints that are accessible from the public where they can just call it, and then you can have this invoke a Convex action. Now, the thing I like about Convex is you have the ability to just write your functions with Node.js, right? They have this use node directive you put at the top of your files, and then that's going to run your code just like it normally would with Node.js. You can use all your normal Node.js packages that you're used to, and you don't have to go and learn Deno or any other type of new libraries just to do something simple. Now, I will say most of Convex's mutations and queries are going to be running in a V8 isolate. So by default, you won't have access to a lot of things. You have to use the web standards. You can't just import a crypto library and start using it. You have to use the built-in web crypto. So there are some differences in terms of writing your functions. Some things will not be accessible, but for the most part, their ideology is you don't need to write a bunch of use node functions. You can just use the V8 isolate approach to things, and you should be able to get 90 or 95% of the way there. If there's anything that you have to use Node for, just reevaluate what you're doing and see if maybe you're just doing something wrong, because and you can just use their runtime under the hood. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is authentication. So when it comes to Supabase, Supabase has built-in authentication, right? So you can actually have users sign up with emails and they'll get email notifications. You can do password resets. They have all of that capabilities baked in, and your users are going to be stored inside of your Supabase database. Okay, if you go to the auth guide, they have a whole list of things you can do. And I would say this is actually a win for Supabase. I like how they have auth built in to their backend as a service, and I don't have to reach out to yet another third-party service to get auth working. Now, I will say there's some things that I've seen with emails getting sent to my junk folder. I don't know if that's because I was just doing a local development type of thing. But overall, I mean, setting up auth with Supabase, as long as you just use one of their templates, it was really straightforward. They also have social media login auth. So you can set up Google authentication or GitHub authentication, etc. They have those options. You can customize some of the things like the emails. But overall, I mean, it's not too flexible. There's some limitations with how much customization you can do. But they do have a ton of stuff built in. I mean, look how much docs are in this auth section. And another benefit of this is that all your users will be stored directly in your Postgres database, right? So you don't have your users stored somewhere else. They're just contained inside your Postgres database, which I like. I think that's a good idea to do. So let's move over to Convex. Convex doesn't really have authentication built in. They kind of recommend that you use a third-party auth service like Clerk or Auth0. And I will be honest, when I first started using Convex, this was the main thing that really frustrated me because I was so used to using NextAuth, and using NextAuth with Convex just wasn't very easy, right? There's no documentation on how to do it. You can set up custom authentication, but you have to figure out how to do that yourself with their providers. And then you have to write your own custom function, which knows how to basically take a cookie and authenticate it. So if you do use Convex, just know that like authentication is not as built in as it is with Supabase. Now, personally, I like using Clerk. I mean, I think Clerk's a great third-party auth service, so I don't have an issue just using Clerk when I use Convex. But with all that being said, I mean, there's nothing preventing you from making your own auth system inside of Convex itself. I mean, you could make a mutation for registration. You can have that send out an email yourself using like resend. You can make an endpoint for a login and have that generate a token and send that back. And then you can have that passed to your Convex front end. But it's just something that on my side projects, I just don't want to do. So I just use built-in Clerk. So that's one thing I would say to Convex is like, if you have more guides into like, what if you don't want to use third-party authentication? Following this is not, to me, wasn't that intuitive. Okay, so those are the two approaches with auth. So let's talk about security. So you could also call this authorization. Supabase and Convex have two completely different paradigms for security. Supabase's idea for security is your users from your front end talk directly to your Postgres database to get data and insert data. Now, because of that direct connection, there has to be a way to basically verify, is the user trying to make this request? Should they have access to this row they're about to write? Or do they have access to this row they're about to read? And the way that you set that up with Supabase is you create something called row level security. And you create these policies on every single table where you can kind of grant write and read permission based on tokens. For example, let's create a new policy, and they have some templates where you basically end up writing like SQL directly to add or remove policies to know when a user should be writing or not reading from tables. I personally do not like this at all. I think it's a lot of extra overhead just to like dive back into SQL. And then secondly, you're basically encoding all of your authorization rules into your database. Okay, so if you want to talk about lock-in, this is a great way to have database lock-in because now all of the authorization rules of your entire application is not in your application layer, it's in your persistence data layer. I'm a fan of separation of concerns, and I think that's something that should live in the application/business logic to know when you can read or write from a certain row in a table. But that's just me. And then also I tried setting up some policies by using like this approach, and I kept getting strange errors in their UI. It just wouldn't create a policy for me. And I wasted probably 30 minutes trying to figure that out. And I said, screw this. I'm just going to go ahead and just give it true for this demo. But there are some weird things that you'll run into where it's like, I don't know how to set up this policy correctly. And the documentation only gives you 5 templates to kind of choose from. Okay, so you kind of have to become like a Postgres expert to understand how to also set up your authorization on your tables. And I'm not really a fan of that. I mean, maybe it's because I'm a Postgres noob, but again, like we're using ORMs and abstractions for a reason so that we don't have to like become experts at Postgres just to build a web application. And the more you use Supabase, the more you realize that you have to become really knowledgeable in Postgres in order to even like get things done. Now for Convex, how do you do authorization? Well, again, everything that you write in Convex is already on the back end, right? You just write some functions to verify certain things, right? So for example, if I were to go at my reactions table, and if we look at toggle reaction, first of all, I wrote a function that abstracts away checking if you're logged in or not. And if you are logged in, you get this context object that has your user. Okay, so what I do is I say, you know what, look through all the reactions and find one that matches this user ID. And if we don't find one, then we can just go ahead and create one. Okay, so the authorization is just written in TypeScript, and you can abstract away as much as you want or as little as you want to know when someone should read or write from a table or a column or a row. You have the complete flexibility, and that's what I like. I like how all this is documented in the code. If you go back to Supabase in terms of authorization, How do you know what you can read and write from? Well, you have to go and actually start looking at your policies in SQL. It's not encoded in your TypeScript, it's encoded in your database. And that is, in my opinion, something that I can't get on board with. I'm sorry. Some people might like that. They might feel like they can move fast with doing row level security. I just don't think it's a good idea. So that's how you do authorization in Convex. You just, write your normal TypeScript code and just check if you are authenticated or not. It's pretty straightforward, right? And you can customize this as much as you need. All right, let's talk about another thing that I think is very important. Okay, when it comes to transactions, if you don't know what a transaction is, it's basically, imagine you have a banking system and you have this feature where a user can transfer money from their account to someone else. You're going to want to use this in a transaction because if for some reason, if you withdraw too much money or if two people tried to transfer at the same time, you may run into a race condition where you've already transferred all the money from user A's account and now you're trying to transfer money again. And so using like an atomic transaction is a way to guarantee that you don't accidentally send or transfer too much money that doesn't even exist in the first place. When it comes to Supabase, from what I understand and what I read, there is no way to do transactions using Supabase's query builder like this. So if you go down here, I do have a way to insert some data into this memes table. You'll see here I say from memes insert empty object. This is how you kind of insert things into Supabase from your front end, but you cannot run stuff in a transaction, right? You can't fetch from a row and then write to another row. So in that scenario with the bank, what you'd end up doing is you want to write one statement that is going to decrement some value from a user's account and verify that it didn't go under 0. And then you want to write another statement to increment, bank account B for that same amount of money. And then you want to run this whole thing in a transaction so that in case something goes wrong in the validation rules, you don't allow this to even go through, right? It'll roll back and then you know for a fact that the bank account's balances are going to be proper. With Supabase, you can't do it. The way they recommend doing it is you write a stored procedure. Again, not a fan of that. You're encoding more and more business logic into your Supabase table, into your Postgres database, and you basically have to call it with a RBC. So if I just do Supabase RPC, you can call different remote procedure calls inside your Supabase database. But I do believe you're going to have to go and create one. So you have to go to your table and then you're going to have to create a function here. And then you can actually RPC this function. And then inside that function, that's where you can write your transaction. And again, your function is going to be written in SQL. It's not going to be written in TypeScript. So you're kind of diving into SQL a lot when you're using Supabase, at least from what I understand. Again, I didn't try to write a transaction in this little example application. Just keep that in mind. Now with Convex, transactions are built in directly into mutations. So anytime you write a mutation, everything that's in this code here, you're guaranteed for it to be atomic and to have a good isolation level. So you can write code where basically you fetch data from your database, you modify that data using TypeScript, and then you insert it back into your Convex table. And if for some reason Convex determines that you have a race condition or two people try to read or write from the same records, it behind the scenes keeps tracks of what records you read from in your transaction. And then if other people try to write to that same record, it's going to actually retry your mutation for you automatically. You don't have to like write some retry logic. So if two people try to write to the same row, what Convex does is it basically says, you know what, we're just going to retry the second one and make sure that that can actually proceed forward. They have this whole article on Convex about how this works because this is actually a really cool technology. Basically, they have a good example of bank transactions and they tell you that all mutations provide isolation. Everything is going to be good in terms of your transactions and everything is atomic. So you have transactions built in. You don't have to really think about it. It just works. Versus Supabase, I don't even know. You have to do so much extra stuff to like get a transaction going and you have to write like RPC calls. It sounds gross. And you could also probably use like a different ORM, like Drizzle ORM that has transactions built in, but then you'd have to go and make a Supabase edge function, use your Drizzle ORM or use your Prisma ORM to write your transaction that connects to your Supabase table directly and does some stuff. But at this point, it's just getting way too overcomplicated. Let's talk about the real-time features of both Supabase and Convex. They're both real-time databases where you can basically have your client listen for changes on your backend and have your UI automatically update. So that's why you saw when I clicked on emojis in one panel, it automatically update in the other tab. I didn't have to write much code to achieve that. Now, the way it works in Supabase is in your table itself. This is just using Postgres under the hood. And in Postgres, they have a way to basically they have this like database replication. Inside this replication, they have events that fire based on your tables, right? So you have to go and you have to enable this. But when you do, you have the ability to basically listen and subscribe to changes directly on the table. So if we look at the code, I have an effect that is basically mounting when this page loads, and it's listening for changes or inserts, I should say, on the memes table. So when someone inserts something into this memes table, I just go ahead and refetch the data and display that. So this is handling the scenario where someone inserts and uploads a new meme file. That's going to show up in everyone's tab who happens to be on this page. And this is all the code you have to write for it. I mean, you can also put a star here. So if you want to listen for delete events, insert event, update events, you can do that. And then you'll also get a payload that tells you exactly what changed on that event. So it gives you some fine grained ability to like do different things based on what was inserted or what updated. But then you have to write all this React code to make that happen, which is why I'm just saying just refresh the page, just refetch all the data. It's much easier just to do that. And then also we have to write another effect for when a reaction is added. So when someone were to click on one of those emojis, we have to listen to yet another table. And then we have to add a filter to say, you know what, only listen for reactions related to the memes that are currently displayed on my page, right? So there's only 5 at a time displayed. I have to get the unique IDs for all these memes, and I put them into a map, and I say, you know what, we only care about reactions that are associated with those memes. And then you run that, and anytime a reaction change, I just go ahead and refetch the data as well. A lot of code just to update my page when stuff changes, right? But it works, and it gives you some fine-grained ability if you want to actually listen for particular changes. Now I'm going to show you something magical with Convex. In terms of how this works in the Convex and using their React library, I don't have to write any custom logic. I can just listen using that query, and if anything in the database were to change and update based on what that query was listening to, Convex, the database itself, sends you a WebSocket event, and all of your data is going to be reloaded live, right? So there's no like on change code anywhere. I just make this query, and if I go and look at the memes query, what's happening is Convex behind the scenes understands that you've read 5 records from this memes table. And then it also understands that you read X amount of reactions from that memes table. And it keeps track of that in its database side. Or it's like in the server side of things with Convex, it keeps track of what entries in the database that you're listening for with this query. And anytime any of those rows or records change, it automatically just sends you a WebSocket event to the users who are subscribed to this query in particular. So that blows my mind away. That's like one of the coolest thing about Convex is I have to write very little to no code, and it knows for me how to update my UIs when data changes. Now again, going back to Supabase, how this is different is I have to manually subscribe to tables. So my front end has to know about all these different tables. It has to know how the relationships are set up between my memes table and my relationships or my reactions table. And then I have to custom write filters to make sure that I don't overfetch or overreact to particular events. And it's just a lot of extra code, which I don't have to worry about, which Convex just does for me under the hood. This alone is like enough reason for me to just pick Convex. It's just the developer experience is much better, and I don't have to worry about writing any type of custom logic to subscribe to events. All right, let's talk about storage. So both Supabase and Convex have a way to store files. Not going to dive into this too much, but basically in Supabase, you create a table or a bucket, and then you can create some policies to check the user's token or the user ID to know if they should have access to read and write from this bucket. So you'll see all these files here. These are just the memes that we are storing into this bucket. And in terms of how to get this working in the front end, you literally just make a form and then you submit it to the back end, right? Over here, we do a storage from memes upload, and we just pass in our file, and that's automatically going to upload that file to our bucket. Okay, and the ID is actually going to be in line with the ID of the meme database record. Okay, so that's kind of how it works with Supabase. Convex also has the ability to store files. So if I go over to Convex and click Files, you'll see that I have a bunch of different memes over here. They've been uploaded to Convex. And in terms of how to integrate this with the client, again, it's pretty straightforward. Now, it's a little bit different with Convex of how do you actually get the ability to upload, because we do have a backend API endpoint we have to write. So you do have to write a mutation to basically tell Convex to generate you a kind of like a pre-signed URL so that you can upload to the Convex storage. So the front end has to make this call first, generate upload URL. And then once you get that upload URL, you can just do a normal form post with a file to that URL to upload the file. Okay, so they're both very similar, and Convex has a upload button library that's kind of community made, which makes it very easy to just upload files using Convex. They both work well. I have no issue with either. Now, in terms of developer experience, that's what DX stands for. I think Convex is the clear winner, from my opinion. I think being able to write files and make new files and save them, automatically have all your types regenerated, and have those accessible within a few seconds inside your React code, much better than Supabase's. Like, I have to go and like modify the table, and then I have to go and run a script to generate the types. Convex is the clear winner there. Also, in terms of DX, I like how quick I can just write functions, save them, and also have those be deployed on a live environment. Like, everything that I write in Convex has that type safety set up already. With Supabase, I feel like to get good at Supabase, what you end up doing is you have to become like a Postgres expert, which I don't want to become a database administrator, right? I just want to be able to write my application code and store some data to Postgres or store some data to a Convex database and read that data. I don't have to go and start learning how to write row-level security or write policies or write triggers, right? There's a ton of stuff that's built into Postgres, and I think the more you dive into this stuff, the more you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because you're just going to be locked in 100% to Postgres, and it's going to be very hard to like understand on a holistic view how this is all working, because again, none of this is encoded inside your TypeScript. It's all like encoded directly into your migration scripts or into your SQL itself. And maybe that's a me issue. I just don't want to have to spend a bunch of time learning like Postgres just to be able to efficiently read and write from a table or know if a user should have access to a certain thing. I would say out of all the things I've tried over my years, Convex has been the only thing that is clearly increased my developer experience over any other tool that I've tried. So that's my opinion. But all right, let's talk about local support. So this one could be a make it or break it for a lot of people. So Supabase, I think, is the clear winner with local support. They give you a cool Docker container that you can run locally. And basically, this UI that you're seeing in my database, in my APIs, and my WebSocket URLs, those are all running locally in a Docker container right here. Okay. So one thing you can do is once you've run npx supabase start, that's going to spin up a Docker Compose file and spin up all of your different URLs. And you can see here you have a URL for your API, a URL for your database, your studio, your file storage. Actually, no, in buckets for emails. You have your anonymous keys and your DWT secrets and stuff. So they have a great way to basically have all this stuff run locally. And that's a clear winner in my opinion, especially when it comes to writing tests in a CI/CD pipeline. You want to be able to make sure that you don't have your GitHub Actions connecting with like a production URL somewhere else, because you don't want flaky tests, and running locally is very important in that aspect. Secondly, if you like to move around or go to like coffee shops or you have spotty internet, it's good to be able to run all this stuff locally, because you don't want to be blocked because your network's just not working. Now, I would say saying that's more of a pipe dream, because there's so much in web development that you need internet for. Like, honestly, if you can't go ask ChatGPT or you can't go to Stack Overflow, unless you really understand everything you're doing, you're going to be stuck anyway. You're going to be blocked anyway. But the local support is much better in Supabase. Now, in terms of Convex, they don't have local support yet. Everything that you do in Convex, you have to point to your live URL. And so there is that delay in transferring, and that does take some time. And then also, if you want to run this in a CI/CD pipeline for like tests or Cypress, you are going to have to connect to their services, which personally, if there's a way, which they do plan in the future to add support for local running of Convex, if I can have all my development be locally, I think it would just be a better experience, because then I don't have to depend on a third-party service when I do my development. Now, a good example of this is I wasted about an hour trying to get my Convex files to save because it kept failing, pushing my code to the Convex's remote service. And the reason was because of the router I was using at my house. Okay. So if they had local support, I wouldn't have run into that issue. I could keep on moving forward, not be blocked because of some weird edge case with my router and pushing files that were too big. But I ended up having to talk to their CTO directly and get some feedback. And he basically said, hey, try using your hotspot on your phone. I did that. Everything worked fine. But like I said, Convex is planning to go open source with their runtime, and you can actually run this stuff all locally soon if they were to get that done. At least that's what they say they're working on. Language support, I'm actually going to skip this one. This is basically TypeScript. I think just Convex does it much better. The auto generation of types is just much, much better developer experience compared to what I've seen with Supabase. That's just my opinion. All right, let's talk about the cron in scheduler. So both Supabase and Convex have ways to basically set up cron jobs and schedule things to run at a later time. The way it works in Supabase is you end up writing SQL statements like this to insert cron jobs into Postgres, basically. So you'll end up writing code like this, which looks kind of awful in my opinion. You write like a cron, and then you name it, and then you have it invoke your Supabase edge function and give it like your function URL. And that's kind of how that works, where you can fire something off every hour if you wanted to. But again, like you're diving into SQL and writing all these SQL statements. And now in terms of cron jobs and scheduling in Convex, you basically just make a crons.ts file, and you can actually just define crons like this. And you can define how often they run, you can title them, and then also you can define a Convex action that you want to invoke, and that's all you have to do. So you're basically still in TypeScript land when you need to write cron jobs, or if you need to schedule things. They have the ability to schedule functions. If you go down here, they have a context scheduler, and you can run some function and say, hey, you know what, in 30 minutes, go ahead and kick off this action. And that's how you can do it in Convex. This is a clear winner in my opinion. You don't have to dive into Postgres to like get a cron job going. So I'm gonna go ahead and just say that we're done with this. Migration. So migrations is a very important thing to talk about. With Supabase, it's just Postgres, right? So as you're making changes to your local table, there's actually a CLI command you run. Now I think there's a Supabase push, so you can kind of go through the Supabase documentation about migrations. And the thing I like about Supabase's migrations is that you can just write migration scripts like you normally would in SQL. Now, the way it works with Supabase DB push is that it compares your locally running database against like your production database, and it'll figure out and create your migrations for you and go ahead and apply them to your production database. You can do stuff like dry runs and stuff. I think this is pretty cool because you're still in SQL land. I know I talked about how I don't want to dive into SQL, but when it comes to migrations, there's so many times where you want to write a script that just runs through all your records that have a certain criteria and just modify or set some default value or delete some type of row. And so you still have the flexibility to just write normal SQL migration scripts to do that. And you just apply them, that'll do all your changes and you're good. So I won't dive too much into migrations of Supabase because it's very similar to just how you do normal migrations. They have just tons of different CLI commands you'd have to do where you can pull or you can create a new migration script, etc. Right? They have like a migration new you can run. That's going to create a migration file, and you can go into that and you can start modifying it and write some SQL if you need to. Now with Convex, migration scripts are a little bit different. There's no built-in migration method from what I understand, but it's not too hard to do. So for example, if I were to add a change to a table, which needed me to add in a default value, the way you do it in Convex is you go to your schema and you mark a property as optional. Okay, so you mark it as optional, you save your schema file, you deploy that to production, and then you have to write a function itself. So over here, Convex has the ability to write internal actions and mutations. So what I've done is I'd actually go over here, I write like a migration.ts file, and then you write out your migration script. So like migrate all users, and that could be a mutation that does some stuff. And then you can actually just write your normal TypeScript migration like this. So you can fetch all the users and you can loop through all of them and you can maybe change your default to value. And then this would be an internal mutation like this, which is something I haven't talked about, but Convex has this ability to write mutations and queries that will only ever be ran either from your dashboard here. So I can go in and find protected mutations and I can run them. All right, let's try that out. I'm gonna go ahead and just save this file and you'll see it pop up in my, over here. Now we have migrations, there's a lock here. So this is an internal mutation and I can run this directly from this dashboard here and that's gonna return true. So the way I do migrations is I'll just write a quick little internal mutation. I'll loop through the data that needs to be changed. I'll rewrite that to the table and then I'll go over to the UI in production and I'll just run it. That's kind of how I've done migrations, but from the docs in Convex, they don't really talk too much about how migrations work. But I will say there's something really cool about the Convex docs, where if you type in migration, you can actually search over their entire Discord channel for anyone who's ever had a discussion about migrations. So there's information out there. They have an introduction to migrations here, which you can read through and understand like what are the best practices for migrations and stuff. But there's no like code examples here, so there's not like a built-in way to do migrations from what I understand. Now, I'm not going to say there's like a clear winner between either of them. It's just something kind of new you have to learn with Convex, which isn't too hard. All right, so we have 3 more, and my voice is starting to go. This video took much longer than I thought it was going to. Let's talk about vendor lock-in and self-hosting. Okay, so Supabase is the clear winner when it comes to vendor lock-in. Like technically, you can run Supabase and self-host your own Supabase. They even have documentation that explains how to do that. Okay, so if you're not a fan of like their pricing and how much stuff costs, you can actually just self-host all the Supabase on your own container and hit the ground running if that's something that you care about. So they do have a way to kind of like not be locked in to their pricing, and you can run all the stuff locally, which could be a make it or break it for a lot of people. I do think using Supabase starts getting you really close to database lock-in, which might lead to vendor lock-in. But keep that in mind that they do have like a self-hosting option. And now in terms of Convex, there's not really a way to do self-hosting. Again, like I mentioned, they are planning to go open source, at least from what they say, and you can have this stuff run locally. I don't know if that's also planned for like, can you run this stuff in production yourself? I highly doubt that. They probably recommend that you still use their hosted services. But that is something to keep in mind, is that you are writing all of these things using Convex's approaches for mutations and queries, and you will probably be locked in to Convex as your application grows in size. So just keep that in mind. Vendor lock-in is a real thing you have to be concerned about if that's something that you and your team, your project have to kind of consider. But again, the data is not locked in at all. You could still write migrations to pull all that data out and migrate it into Postgres if you wanted to. It's just going to involve some work, right? There's no way to self-host this if you don't like the pricing that Convex has. But from when I've seen, the pricing of Convex is pretty fair. I mean, I think it's pretty good with how much developer experience you're getting with all the features. I think it's pretty good. So for vector search, I'm just going to throw that in there. A lot of applications are starting to be hooked into AI. And vector searching is a way to basically take all your documents and vectorize them so you can later come back and use embeddings to find documents that are very closely related to the vectors that you stored. Vector search is built into Convex. It's also built into Supabase. I think one thing Convex is doing really well is they are making sure that they support the capabilities of building out AI-enabled applications as much as possible without having to go and like use other third-party services, right? So you have vector search, you have all these different AI examples of how you can do stuff with Convex. It's pretty cool. Supabase also has a vector search, from what I understand. So I think they're both on par in terms of support for AI, which is pretty cool. But I just want to throw that out there. They both have those capabilities, and they're both nice. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the learning curve. I personally think the learning curve for Convex was very, very low. Now, the reason I say that is because I came from a TRPC handstack query type of approach for building out React applications. And when I saw Convex's approach for connecting to a backend and like running some data, it was super familiar, right? In TRPC, you basically have your page and you basically write use query, and then you pass it your TRPC query endpoint. So this was like the easiest learning curve for me. And then again, I don't have to go and learn a bunch about Postgres and how to set up row level security and how to set up policies and how to set up triggers. I just have to basically write code in TypeScript, and that's it. I don't have to leave the TypeScript ecosystem and be like a polyglot coder. I just have to worry about writing TypeScript and understanding the nuances of Convex's database and how like real-time works under the hood. Postgres, on the other hand, I think it just has a higher learning curve. I mean, if you look through the docs themselves, like there's so much stuff that's built into it that it takes a long time to kind of feel like you're productive. Just learning how to connect to your Postgres database from your UI and set up security alone, and then going and understanding policies and then using their UI to create a policy, but it fails to create because you don't have TypeScript safety when you're trying to create these policies. I think it just has a much higher learning curve, in my opinion. even if they added ability for AI to help you write these things, like this is not something that is very easy to do. Like for example, if I wanted to use this template and I say auth, notice I do a dot, I don't get any IntelliSense. I have no idea what could be on this. So then I have to go and read through their documentation and remember, oh, well, there's a JWT on here I can use. And then what is this weird like arrow syntax? I have no idea. So that's more stuff you have to learn. So just adding some basic authorization into your tables, it's going to take you more time. And then you realize you're just learning a bunch of Postgres stuff, and it's, I don't know. For some, they might enjoy that. For me, I don't want to have to learn that stuff. So I think the learning curve for me for Supabase was higher, which is why, again, I just kind of gravitate towards using Convex. I just think it makes more sense. I think Convex has built out their system with React as its like first-class citizen, and it has React and TypeScript in mind at all times. Again, the TypeScript support for Supabase kind of weird at sometimes. I mean, like you get some IntelliSense here. Like if I want to insert a record into memes, like it gives you the IntelliSense. But as you saw with like the query, which is above, like there's no IntelliSense here. You don't know what columns exist on this table unless there's something I'm just missing. But anyway, that is my 1 hour overview of why I personally like picking Convex over Supabase and some of the benefits, the pros and cons of both Supabase and Convex. Anyway, this video went much longer than I thought it was going to be. I like to talk a lot, I guess, but I think these are really good topics to kind of point out. If you're on the fence of like, should I try Supabase? Should I try Convex? These are my explanations as to why I like picking Convex over Supabase, and I'll probably stick with Convex. Other than that, if you guys want to join a Discord channel, I have one in the description below. Feel free to join if you want to find a place to kind of talk to some other developers or ask some questions to me directly. Other than that, have a good day and happy coding.